Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to put together some first thoughts on potential builds you might want to bring to the Endless Heist event. Now, I'm going to go through all the ascendancies in the game and provide one recommendation for a build that I think is something you could seriously consider in this event. The first thing we need to say is that Replica uniques will be everywhere, uniques will be everywhere, flask charges will be pretty much limitless in Endless Heist. Heist well rolled, rares are going to be common, and there's also occasional downtime. And all of these are factors that might sort of slightly impact your choice of build. So firstly, before we talk ascendancies at all, let's talk some build around items. If you get one of these in SSF, you probably want to consider using it. At least give it some thought. If you get it in trade enabled, you might want to trade it, but if you do want to keep it, then it's something that could conceivably have a build that works around it. These items vary in rarity quite a lot. So you'll see Replica Dreamfeather at the more common end here, and March of the Legion at the sort of quite rare end, Replica Elberon's Warpath at the very rare end of options here. But all these, I think, if you get one of these, or if you're willing to commit to farming enough currency or other resources in order to trade for one, then in a trade league, then these are things you might want to give a bit of thought to. First one is March of the Legion. These boots are certain to get nerfed in 3.17, or at least I'm certain they will. They've been overperformers for a long time, but they've got really ridiculous recently. This is a build that uses Supreme Ego cluster jewels with introspection rolled on them, and it basically lets you get massive additional effect of all of your auras and run more of them than you normally could. It's also really unpleasant to play, so just keep that in mind. It's something where you're going to have a lot of additional keybinds. You'll be pressing Control Q, Control W, Control E, Control R at every door that you come to, and also sometimes in between doors. That said, March does play really well in a world where you have convenient scheduled breaks like those doors. This is a Tier 2 rarity unique. This means it's the same rarity as Mjolnir, as Chevron's Wrappings, and as the Brass Dome. Replica Dreamfeather is the next one that I would consider as a build around, and in fact this is going to be what I recommend when I get to the Guardian Ascendancy. Although you can certainly play it on other builds. Grace, Determination, Iron Reflexes, Jade Flask, and Granite Flask all come together to give you a tremendous amount of armor on a Replica Dreamfeather build, and Replica Dreamfeather gives you 1% increased weapon attack damage with this weapon per 450 armor your character's got. At a lower level of investment, Flasks down, you can get to something like 60,000 armor. At a higher level of investment, Flasks up, you can start pushing 500,000 or more. And this means that Replica Dreamfeather does tremendous damage. You can then use it with all sorts of different attack builds, attack shenanigans. Now, you can't realistically get Transcendence. That is a Timeless Duel exclusive keystone that's often used in conjunction with Replica Dreamfeather. The reason you can't realistically get it is that Timeless Duels are only available in this event through divination cards, and those divination cards are very rare. Of course, you can try and get them. Just expect that this will be something that's really only for the sort of player that plays enough. You could reasonably expect to trade for something like a Replica Farrell's Fur in a trade league. I think that getting the right Timeless Duel for Transcendence will be about as hard as getting a Replica Farrell's is in a trade league. So, I'm unsure of the rarity of Replica Dreamfeather, but it is not very rare. I think that this build is going to be Power Gamer only in solo self-found, but quite accessible in trade, but I could be wrong. Replica Shroud of the Lightless will be rare in this event, but more accessible than usual, and it's just a really good item. Replica Elberon's Warpath empowers some chaos damage strength stacking builds. It's a very rare item, but it is also very good. Consider this to be a trade-enabled item only, unless you happen to play SSF and just get really lucky and see one, in which case, by all means, roll a character to use it. At the more common end, Replica Allelopathy is really good as something that you can use early on to get Wintertide Brand really going. Replica Alpha's Howl is something that I wanted to point out as an option as well. You can either build around this using Herald of Thunder, or you can just simply use it to empower Herald of Ice. If your build is already using Herald of Ice, Replica Alpha's Howl will make it much better, and it's something that I really like in that setup. In fact, I'm considering playing myself something that uses Replica Alpha's Howl and Herald of Ice. Lastly, there's Crest of Desire. This is one of the Heist exclusive uniques, so it will be more common than usual in this event. It's a very rare item in trade leagues, but I think in this event, you'll probably be able to get yourself one through trading pretty easily. Lots of things work really well in Crest of Desire, but I'm really fond of using it in conjunction with a Herald, or also using it with Tempest Shield. Tempest Shield can do some funny things with Crest of Desire. So, firstly, we're going to look at the Witch. For each Ascendancy, I'm going to give a suggestion of something you could build around. So firstly, we've got Elementalist. Detonate Dead Ignite is really good. This can be adapted to other Ascendancies like the Necromancer as well. It just does a lot of damage and also has various methods of proliferating that damage through packs. And so I'm quite a fan of this build. It's something that can kill the heist bosses pretty easily. Now, when I say heist bosses, I'm not talking about the bosses of the unique heists, things like the Vox Twins. They're not actually going to be in this event. I'm talking about the unique monsters that you do encounter in regular heists. They're pretty tanky. Things like there's a unique monster called Backbreaker that will appear quite a bit, or Tormentor. These can take a little bit of time to kill on builds that have less damage. Detonate Dead Ignite builds will do a lot of damage and we'll just shred them apart. Next up for Occultist, I'm going to suggest that the cold damage over time self-cast builds are in a really good place here. A reason I like this is that when you're opening a door, you can stand a safe distance back and fire a Cold Snap through it, or a Wintertide Brand if you prefer, and you can just let that do most of the work. Then once most of the monsters are dead, you can comfortably run through, drop a Vortex to clean up any stragglers. I think this will be one of the really solid options if you want a more safe play style, where your character can't kill things super fast, but you can kill them fast enough to matter. And you will also just be inherently very durable because the Occultist is a durable Ascendancy. Next up for the Necromancer are just any real summoner build that's a generalist build. There's a lot of options here. So I did, however, discuss the Skeleton Mage option with my Twitch stream earlier. And we came to the conclusion, or at least I came to the conclusion, some people disagreed with me, but I came to the conclusion that I don't like this because of mobility issues with it. And what I mean by that is that when you come to an obstruction in your path, your skeletons may be a long way behind and you're going to need to cast Convocation first before you can get any damage. But firstly, Convocation needs to happen. Then the skeleton mages themselves need to start firing again. That can add a fair bit of time, and additionally, they can be a bit tricky around corners. So for that reason, I'm not confident to recommend the Skeleton Mage build. But other summoner builds, definitely, especially ones that get up close and personal. Any skeleton build that's good in the Trade League is something to consider here. Just make sure that it's not something that's reliant upon a specific unique item. Shadow is next. For the Assassin. Had a lot of trouble with this because the Assassin's not the strongest Ascendancy at the moment. Eventually came to the conclusion that probably the best use for the Assassin in this event, for people that want to get to level 85 or 90 or something like that, but that aren't really interested in pushing much beyond that, the Assassin is the best Ascendancy to play Cast on Critical Strike at from earlier in progression. So the Assassin can use Cast on Critical Strike really from the level that the gem comes online, which from memory is 37, and you can use pretty much any payload you want. Whilst most people that are playing in a trade league that are power gamers that decide to play an Assassin Cast on Crit build, whilst they tend to homogenize on a couple of specific payloads, these being either Ice Nova or Freezing Pulse or a couple of others, the Assassin can be used with a lot of other things like Arc or, all sorts of payload spells. I'll let you play around with that. But basically, the fact that you've got access to the starter dagger that's really good for Cast on Critical Strike will make things a lot smoother and will let you start this build earlier than you otherwise could. This will be a squishy build. Assassins tend to be pretty squishy at the moment, and it will work best if you mostly run Scoured contracts. And I would suggest this is one of the best builds in the game for getting to level 85, but much less powerful after that because the squishiness is going to be a problem. Trickster comes next, and I can really suggest only Essence Drain Contagion here. Essence Drain Contagion is fine on multiple Ascendancies. The reason I'm suggesting it with the Trickster is not that the Trickster is the best Ascendancy to play Essence Drain Contagion on. It's probably not, but that the Trickster is just quite a bad Ascendancy at the moment. And Essence Drain Contagion isn't an amazing build on a Trickster, but you're only competing with other Tricksters, not with real Ascendancies. And as a result, your opponents will be in a weaker place as well. Your opponents being the people that you're competing with if you're trying to go for one of the demigod's authorities. And therefore, you may well decide that this is actually your best chance, is to play an EDC Trickster. And it's not just Essence Drain Contagion. There are other builds that can do functionally as a Trickster as well. Cold damage over time, Occultist can be repurposed into a slightly worse Trickster version. a Fireball or other type of Ignite, a build that's an Elementalist, a lot of them can be turned into a slightly worse version that's a Trickster. So there's options there, but that's what we're going to say. What I'm going to say for this Ascendancy. For the Saboteur, Seismic Trap is too good, especially in heist environments. So in heist, it's really good because you've got a short pause when you've got a door. You can throw a bunch of traps out, let them just obliterate everything behind the door, and by the time that you start moving again, you got your Seismic Traps back. You've also got Exsanguinate as a trap, as a backup to deal with the trash that just miss the Seismic Trap, or when there's a small enough pack that it's not worth throwing out the big guns. So yeah, Seismic Trap is really, really good. The other duration and cooldown traps are also pretty strong. So this is Lightning Spire Trap, this is Flamethrower Trap. They're just less so than Seismic Trap, but they're all fine. They're something you could use conceivably as well. For the Ranger Ascendancies, we have, for the Deadeye, I'm going to suggest a Elemental Hit Wand attack using Piscator's Vigil and Elemental Equilibrium. So you're not trying to set things up so that you're only doing one type of elemental damage. You're doing all three. Piscator's Vigil is really good. Defensive Reservations to make up for the inherent squishiness, and also for the fact that you just don't have great aura options. So Grace, Determination, Tempest Shield, and or Precision is where I would go when it comes to auras there. For the Raider, you have lots of options. The Raider is one of the most versatile and powerful Ascendancies right now. You could go a Coldslinger, which is a cold damage over time Spellslinger build. You could go an Icebite Spectral Helix using the Starter Dagger, or you could do lots of other things as well. Raider Lightning Strike is popular in Trade League, and you can certainly play that here as well. Although I'm not recommending that here because I wanted to save Lightning Strike for a different Ascendancy. That said, Raider Lightning Strike is fine. Pathfinder, Poisonous Concoction is the thing that I would probably suggest here. A bit of discussion that we've had about whether you would want to go Occultist or Pathfinder for this build, and I'm going to suggest Pathfinder in the context of Endless Heist. In solo self-found, and particularly solo self-found hardcore environments, it is definitely the Occultist build that is performing better. But the Occultist has considerable ramp-up time on its damage, whereas a Pathfinder can kill one enemy and then proliferate poison to a large area, and that's a fantastic source of extra damage. Makes Poisonous Concoction in a really good place there. So Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder is something I'd recommend in a world where there's lots and lots of weak enemies that you can proliferate from. In the middle, we're going to talk the Scion, and here I'm going to recommend a physical Spellslinger. So this build uses Corrupting Fever and stacks it up to 10 on tankier monsters, but only stacks it up to 1 or 2 on a lot of squishy ones. But it also uses Spellslinger linked to Reap and Spellslinger linked to Exsanguinate. These aren't necessarily max linked or anything like that. They deal moderate damage, and they also proc the Corrupting Fever. This build is strong at killing trash, while a bit weaker at killing tankier monsters, but it's quite tanky. The way it becomes tanky is by using Gladiator Ascendancy firstly, and the Necromancer Ascendancy. The Necromancer Ascendancy lets your offering skills work on you at reduced efficiency. And this gives you a large amount of block because you're going to use a cast while channeling setup. This is inferior to the trigger ones that would normally be used, but it's still perfectly serviceable. So what you want is Winter Orb linked to cast while channeling, linked to Desecrate, linked to Bone Offering. This is going to cause a situation where your Winter Orb is channeling Winter Orb, and we'll come to why it's Winter Orb specifically, is going to then to trigger Desecrate and Bone Offering. Bone Offering is then going to provide you with a huge defensive buff, giving you both spell block and attack block. So why Winter Orb? I looked through all of the different channeling skills. Unfortunately, none of the attack skills, because you'd be using a wand to attack to set off your Spellslinger, none of them can be used with wands. And I did check Charge Dash, that was my first thought, but unfortunately that is melee only. So Winter Orb continues to hit enemies, and therefore, even though you're not going to do any meaningful damage with Winter Orb, you are going to proc Corrupting Fever on enemies. And so if you come across a tankier enemy, you just stop still, use your Winter Orb, channel up your Winter Orb for a bit. That'll trigger Desecrate and Bone Offering. And as well as that, you'll also get a few hits in, which will get Corrupting Fever going on that enemy as well. This is worse than a usual trigger wand setup, but it's all that we have. So I recommend that you give this some thought if you want to go a Scion. There are, of course, other Scion builds that people will have success with. This is just one that I wanted to suggest. From the Duelist class, the Slayer Ascendancy, Bladestorm was something that I think works pretty well in the environment of heists, And you can play this as an elemental crit build if you want something different, or you can play it with the more traditional physical impale scaling. Both of these will work with the Slayer Ascendancy. Which one is up to you? I feel like the physical version will probably be slightly stronger, but don't let me stop you from trying the elemental version because I do think it has a lot of potential too. Champion, we're going to go super meta and recommend Toxic Rain. Toxic Rain, there's no area to dodge that inside Heist, so it's just going to hit everything and it's going to kill everything. It's super meta, it's super strong, it's very, very tanky, and just a very strong Ascendancy all around the champion. I'm recommending Toxic Rain though. You can play lots of things on the champion Ascendancy. For the Gladiator, we're going to talk the shield skills archetype. This can be Shield Crush, or it can be Spectral Shield Throw, or it can be a combination of both. Being a Gladiator, you'll get access to Bleed Explosions, which are amazing. You wanting to inflict bleeds here. And Lionized Remorse is a really good tier 3 rarity unique. So when I'm talking rarity tiers, there's tier 1 are genuinely rare. This is things like Rizlatha's Coil. Tier 2 are still too rare for most people to find them in this event. That's things like Chevron's Wrappings. And tier 3 is something like 6 times as common as that. This is the rarity tier of Cold Iron Point. And so Lionized Remorse is not a common item, but it's also not very rare. Then tier 4 is something like 4 times as common as tier 3, and that includes things like Tabula Rasa. And then tier 5 is twice as common again, and that includes things like Worm's Molt. So Marauder is next. Juggernaut is the first Ascendancy, and you got to say that again, Juggernauts are competing with other Juggernauts. They're not competing with the real Ascendancies. Juggernaut is basically worse than the champion at pretty much everything in the game at the moment. That's not quite completely true. There are some situations where the Juggernaut can be better, but broadly speaking, the Juggernaut is champion but worse. It has less damage than the champion, and it's generally actually less tanky. That said, Brutus's Lead Sprinkler strength stacking is something that the Juggernaut can do that a lot of other Ascendancies struggle with. It's really Juggernaut or Chieftain if you want to play this build. And you can use this with any attack skill pretty much. Brutus's Lead Sprinkler is a tier 3 rarity item. So again, it's that same Cold Iron Point rarity. This can play with other rarer strength stacking items if you get them, like for instance a Replica or Elberon's Warpath. You'll need to rebuild for that, but if you do get that item, you definitely want to rebuild around it. One thing I want to point out though is that Endurance Charge Duration Mastery is actually surprisingly good in the context of Heist. This will give you a considerable buff to the duration of your endurance charges, and that's important because if you're not getting hit, they're not ticking down. And while you're waiting for rogue, while you're looting chests, while you're waiting for your rogue to open a door or something like that, you are not generating endurance charges and you're not being hit. And so that is actually something you're going to want to spend a point on here. For Chieftain, I felt like I would recommend Infernal Blow as a Beefton. Or as a more speculative and risky option, you could try Consecrated Path linked to Earthbreaker support. I don't recommend any teleport move skill attacks. So Flicker Strike, Consecrated Path, and the like. I think these are really bad in the context of Heist because the most dangerous spots are behind a door when the door has just been opened. Those are the most dangerous places in the event, and you do not want to be teleporting into something like that. However, you can always send a Sacrificial Totem in front of you. And that's what Consecrated Path Earthbreaker will do. There's lots of other options for attack totems as well, and the Chieftain is well suited to them. You could use something like a Ancestral Warchief Totem if you wanted, and sort of scale your build around that as well, and that's a fine option too. Berserker comes next. Here is where I'm going to recommend Lightning Strike. Now this is great on many Ascendancies. I'm just choosing to recommend it for the Berserker because some people are going to want to play a Berserker, and it is one of the things that works pretty well for Lightning Strike. Templar is going to be the next Ascendancy we're going to talk. Oh, it's not Ascendancy, the next class we're going to talk. The Man with No Neck. And so we're going to start with Holy Flame Totem as a recommendation for the Hierophant. I really like the idea of totem skills in Endless Heist. The reason for this is that while you are playing a totem skill in the normal game, you often have periods where you're annoyed because you're waiting for your totem to be cast, or you're waiting for your totem to start firing on enemies. This downtime can be timed really well in Heist. So when the game is giving you a breather, like while your rogue is opening a door or whatever, at that point you can drop down your Holy Flame Totems. Hierophant's pretty tanky sometimes. Not one of the absolute most durable builds around, but you can survive big hits when you make mistakes. And that's something that I really like as well. Now, I'm suggesting Holy Flame Totem, but I'm absolutely not saying that you need to be Holy Flame Totem here. You can use a different totem if you prefer. It's just that I feel like Holy Flame is in a good place in the context of Heist. You can play as other brand builds. You can play as other totem builds. There are lots of options for the Hierophant, actually. It's a really versatile ascendancy at the moment. It's only good at 3 or 4 things, but it is very, like, those 3 or 4 things are very different to each other. Next up, we have the Inquisitor. Here is where I want to recommend Righteous Fire. You need to be careful playing this because the incoming damage when you cross door thresholds can be ridiculous in Heist. So this is not, as like in a lot of cases, people recommend Righteous Fire Inquisitor because of all the massive amount of regeneration that it can stack on it. They recommend this as a hardcore build. I'm a bit less confident about it as a hardcore build here, but I do think it will be quite solid in softcore. And it'll be quite solid if you have tight mechanical skill for when you get into a situation where you're going through a door and it's a sketchy situation straight on the other side. Next up is the Guardian, and here I want to say that although I said Replica or Dreamfeather is a build agnostic item that you can build around, I'm going to recommend it here. Divine Shield is nuts. Auras give you damage and durability as a Guardian, and you could either go physical damage or you could go elemental conversion here. I'm kind of keen to test out the idea of playing a Guardian with Replica Dreamfeather that runs Grace and Determination all the time, that paths on the tree to the annoying location where you can pick up Iron Reflexes, that stacks a whole bunch of armor and evasion scaling on the tree, and that uses this to get an immense amount of armor and immense amount of damage through it. Then pops a Granite Flask and pops a Granite Flask for more damage, perhaps a Jade Flask for more damage, and then scales up as much aura effect as it realistically can. And then, you know, you've got all the pieces together to do a lot of damage. You can then choose, you're definitely going to use Divine Shield because Divine Shield is really good with a little bit of Energy Shield or a moderate amount, either or. And then your auras are going to give you damage, they're going to give you durability, and you can play physical or conversion. You got Hatred as well with this setup if you go conversion. And I really like actually the idea of potentially cold converting and using Hatred. Although be aware, it's not realistic to do more than 90% cold conversion. So you will be leaving a little bit of damage on the table there. Anyways, that's my thoughts. Something for every Ascendancy. If you've got comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you in Endless Heist.